Hi friends, and welcome once again to Nathan's Bible Time. It's a time where we can come together and study God's Word while we're apart from each other at this moment. I hope that you're having a wonderful weekend. I hope that this week's going to be great for you too. Last week we came together and we discussed a few things with our friend Nathan, who we're going to talk to in a few moments to help us learn our new Bible lesson this week. But I thought I would just give us a reminder of what we talked about this past Wednesday when it comes to our lesson. We talked about the Israelites' murmurings against God. It's kind of a funny word. And we talked about essentially how murmurings means that they were complaining against the provision that God was giving for them as He was taking them out of the land of Egypt and into the land of Canaan. He had provided for them manna, He had given them water, He had done so much for them during this journey, and yet they complained and they wanted to go back to Egypt. Now because of that, there were some consequences. God was upset with them and they suffered because of it. But we also talked about how in the middle of all their tents, there was this big worship tent called the tabernacle. And if you remember, in the tabernacle was something very, very special. And that was the presence of God. It came in a cloud by day, it came in a fire by night. And it led the people where they needed to go, comforting them, helping them, and taking care of them. But remember how we talked about how we must learn not to complain. How we need to be grateful and thankful for all the things that God has given us. We even looked at Nathan's experience and how he wasn't grateful for some things that his own mother had done for him. And we learned that as children and as friends, we should always be grateful and always be thankful. So that's where we left off last week in our story. This week, the title of our lesson is The 12 Spies. Now that sounds a lot more fun than last week's lesson. See, my kids love playing like they're spies at times. It's a fun game they enjoy playing. Well, there were some spies in Israelites' history as well. See, the Israelites were coming closer and closer to what was referred to as the Promised Land, or the land of Canaan. Now, if you remember, this is the land that God had told Abraham, their forefather, that He would give to His people. And so they're coming closer and closer to this Promised Land, the land that God had promised them, the land of Canaan. And while they're kind of close to it, God told Moses, the leader of the Israelites, to send out 12 spies to look at this land. They were going to check it out and see what it was like. They were going to go into the land and they were going to see what kind of people lived there. They were going to see what the cities were like. They were going to scope out and see if the ground was good for giving food. And so that was their main objective. Go check out the land, go see what was going on. So they go into the land to see. The 12 spies afterwards, after a few days, they come back to Moses and to the people. And the spies were talking about how wonderful the cities were and how great the fruit was. It was an abundant land. It was a good land. There was great food in this land. So there was a lot of good news. In fact, they even brought back some grapes and other fruits to show the people how prosperous and how good this land was. And so, and can you imagine these people that have been eating bread and quail for so long, seeing these grapes and these fruits, how wonderful that must have been for them? They must have been so excited, and there was a lot of good news. Until 10 of the spies said, well, listen, it's a good land, but there's giants over there. These people are too mighty for us to conquer. They were scared by what they saw. They had seen some giant men, and they were afraid if they tried to go into the land, the giants would defeat them. But notice I said only 10 of the spies were afraid. 2 of the spies were courageous. Their names were Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua and Caleb trusted in God. They knew that God had promised the people of Israel to give them this land. And they were confident that God would. And they tried to encourage the people by saying, listen, God is going to be with us. God is going to give us this land. We just need to trust in Him. But the people decided to trust the other spies instead of Joshua and Caleb. They were afraid. They didn't trust God. And therefore, they were afraid to go into the land of Canaan. Now, I want to talk with Nathan for a few moments about what faith is, and a little bit about fear, and a little bit about the 12 spies. So let's go and find our friend Nathan. Dun, 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 Nathan? What are you doing?
Hey, Mr. Jacob, what's going on, man?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Guess what I'm doing right now?
What are you doing?
I'm playing Spy.
Spy?
Yeah, did you like my moves? Watch this.
That's pretty great. You sound like a pretty good spy to me.
Thank you very much.
Back
Nothing like those two guys you were just talking about, though.
Oh, really? Well, you heard us talking about that.
Yeah, I heard you guys telling about the story.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. It's about how these spies went into the land of Canaan. Now, if you were listening, maybe you can help answer some of these questions that we have.
I think I can do that for sure.
All right, so we were talking about how the spies were sent into the Promised Land. Do you remember why they were sent to the Promised Land?
Yeah, they were going to see how good the land was.
That's right. And what did they find there? Do you remember?
They found some great fruit there, Mr. Jacob, and also they found something else, but honestly, I kind of forgot.
Well, they found some pretty mighty men, some giant men that most of the spies were afraid of. And those 10 spies said, listen, we know God's promised us this, but these people are too mighty for us to conquer. But there were 2 spies who said, you know what, these people are mighty, they're powerful, but our God is greater than that. And He's promised to give us this land, and He's going to give us this land. So do you remember the names of those 2 spies?
I sure do, Mr. Jacob. Their names are Joshua and Caleb.
That's great. Yeah, that's their names, Joshua and Caleb. In fact, later we're going to learn that Joshua is going to take Moses' place as the new leader of Israel. So this is kind of his beginning story, his origin story, where we find out more and more about Joshua. So we want to be like those 2 spies, don't we, Nathan?
Yes, we do. I need to keep working on my skills if that's the case.
Yeah, that's right, to be a spy like them. But the greatest act that they did wasn't simply that they went and spied out the land, but they had faith in God.
That's right.
Do you know what faith is, Nathan?
Right. Yeah, I really do.
Faith is about trusting in God. So they trusted in God. So when we think of faith, we need to think of trusting in God.
Let's say that together. Faith is trusting in God. One more time, everybody. Faith is trusting in God.
Now, Nathan, after all of this happened, God was really upset with the people because they didn't trust Him. Just like I would be upset if my children didn't trust me, it would really hurt me. And so there were consequences to their actions. Because they didn't trust God, God said, well, if you don't trust me to give you the land, then you won't have the land. And so He made them go back into the wilderness, and they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years.
40 years?
40 years. Now,
wow.
In that time, that generation of people died off. And there were only 2 people from that generation that were able to inherit the promised land. Can you take a guess at who those 2 people were?
I'm going to guess Joshua and Caleb.
That's right. Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies that trusted God, were the only ones from that generation who would be able to inherit the promised land. And so God was faithful to them because they trusted in Him. Now, even though we're not looking for the promised land of Canaan today, as Christians, we have a promised land that we're looking forward to.
That's right.
A home with God, where we'll be with Him forever. A new heavens and a new earth where righteousness dwells. And that's our promised land. That's what we look forward to. And God has told us that He's going to give it to us. And the question is whether or not we're going to trust in Him, and whether or not we're going to be afraid, or if we're going to have faith. That's really what this lesson is about. Real quickly, Nathan, how many years did the Israelites have to wander in the wilderness?
They wandered for 40 years.
40 years. We don't want to have those consequences. We don't want to have the consequences of not trusting in God, because we want to be with God forever. Now, Nathan, was there ever a time in your life where you felt like you needed to trust in someone?
Oh, yes, there was, Mr. Jacob. I can actually remember of a perfect time.
Really?
Why don't you go ahead and come along as we go to the swimming pool where I had to learn how to trust my dad.
All right, Nathan. Are you ready to take the dive into the pool?
I think I am, Dad. I'm not going to lie, though. I'm pretty scared.
Oh, don't worry, son. You jump in and hit the water, it'll be just fine. I'm right here to catch you.
Okay, well, friends, here I go. All right, here we go. Okay, I can do this. Okay. Whoo. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Oh, Dad, I don't think I can do it.
Really? Son, I would never ask you to do anything that would hurt you. If you'll just trust me, everything will be okay.
Okay, Dad, well, let's try this again. Okay, here I go. 1, 2, 3. Whoa! Dad, I did it!
Great job, son. See, I told you, I would never do anything to hurt you. You just have to trust me.
Wow, Nathan, that was a great story. I'm glad you told us about that.
Oh, yeah, me too. I had a lot of fun swimming, too. Now I know I can jump in the pool on my own.
That's right, and it's all because you trusted in your dad. You knew that he loved you, and you knew that he was going to be there for you. And that's how it is when it comes to trusting in God. In fact, we talked a little bit earlier about how faith is trusting in God. And that's what faith is. And that's what we've talked about today. So that's our lesson about the 12 spies. Nathan, we really appreciate you being here with us today to help us learn this lesson.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob. I've got one more thing for the kids before they go.
Sure.
Thank you, kids, for joining us. See you
Thanks,
later.
guys. Y'all have a great day.